broadcast tonight. A day after a naval skirmish between the two Koreas, the North imposes a no-sail zone in the EC, hinting at additional missile launches. The country's exports rose to the second highest mark on record last month, backed by growing shipments to advanced countries, including the U.S. and China. Plus, it's been 10 years since Korea put into force its first ever free trade agreement with Chile. A look at whether the bilateral pact managed to create the win-win effects it desired. These stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Good evening to our viewers in Korea, and hello to those of you who are watching from around the world. It's Tuesday, the first day of April here in Seoul. I'm Yoo Ji-hye. We begin this evening with escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula. A day after the two Koreas peppered each other's territorial waters with artillery shells, word gets out that North Korea has imposed a no-go zone in disputed seas. It's a move seen as a possible preparation for additional launches, while the South warned of serious consequences if the regime carries out another provocation. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
South Korean Defense Ministry spokesperson Min-seok in a press briefing on Tuesday said there are currently no signs that North Korea is preparing for any additional provocations. But he added that the South Korean military is ready just in case.
We will retaliate if North Korea attacks again at an appropriate level to stop their provocations.
The ministry says artillery rounds fired on Monday afternoon were from multiple rocket launchers, which lacked accuracy, especially compared to the precision of the K-9 self-propelled heavy artillery used by South Korea. Officials say that out of the 500 shells fired by the North during a live-fire military drill, around 100 fell almost 3.5 kilometers over the border in South Korean waters near Pyeongdo Island. South Korean military retaliated in line with a new rule of engagement that is based on the principle of taking an eye for an eye. In response to the 100 North Korean shells that landed south of the northern limit line, the South Korean military's response was threefold, with 300 K-9 self-propelled heavy artillery shells fired into North Korean waters. However, tensions may be on the rise, this time on the eastern coast of the peninsula. According to local media reports, citing an unidentified high-level government official, North Korea earlier issued a no-sail zone in the East Sea from Monday through Friday. That has raised speculation that Pyongyang might be gearing up for another ballistic missile launch. In another development, an unidentified unmanned aerial vehicle was found crashed on Pyeongdo Island on Monday afternoon, 1 hour after the two Koreas stopped exchanging fire. The South Korean military is investigating to determine where it came from and whether North Korea was involved. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
And North Korea also launched verbal attacks on South Korean President Park Geun-hye, denouncing her recent proposal to lay the groundwork for unification. This prompted the South to lash out at the communist state for repeatedly displaying senseless behavior toward the South Korean leader. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee has more.
South Korea slammed North Korea on Tuesday for launching verbal attacks on South Korean President Park Geun-hye. Through its Nodongshinmun newspaper, the North denounced the South Korean leader for her recent comments on North Korea's economic difficulties, calling her derogatory names like an eccentric old maid and an idiot. President Park's remarks were part of her grand reunification speech given last week in the German city of Dresden, where she laid out her plans for bringing the two Koreas together. Pyongyang had pledged to end all cross-border slandering earlier this year, and Seoul's Unification Ministry said the remarks put the regime's sincerity into question.
Such actions by North Korea raise suspicions about whether its so-called important proposal for mending inter-Korean ties was just an empty shell.
In Dresden, President Park proposed 3 ways to bring the two Koreas together: increasing humanitarian aid, holding more inter-Korean family reunions, and assisting in North Korea's infrastructure projects. Experts say the recent resumption of verbal attacks can be interpreted as a no to the president's offer.
But if we see it in the long term, it is very threatening for Kim Jong-un regime. This approach can be make the separation between common North Korean people and Kim Jong-un, the political elites.
One way to solve the latest escalation in inter-Korean tensions may be for the Koreas to hold another round of high-level talks, as they did in February.
We should always talk and keep the communication channels open, if for nothing else, to test North Korea's intentions and to monitor for any signs of change and to look for opportunities.
While talking things out may be the best way to solve a conflict, experts add that South Korea should not be naive about its partner's intentions. But dialogue may not be an option for now, as the South Korean government says it does not plan on engaging in high-level talks anytime soon. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
And despite the rhetoric and artillery shells flying over the inter-Korean border, President Park Geun-hye isn't abandoning her hopes for a unified Korea. At an annual dinner with ambassadors and top diplomats in Seoul Tuesday evening, the president asked that they do all they can to achieve a peaceful unification. She also explained to them in more detail the proposal she rolled out last week in Germany. Referring to a 3-year economic innovation plan that was announced earlier this year, the president called on the diplomats to help Korean companies expand overseas, create more jobs, and increase foreign investments. Well, North Korea has once again placed itself at the center of international criticism for its latest provocations. The United States has slammed Pyongyang for its actions, and even North Korea's closest ally, China, has expressed deep concern. ARIRANG News' Yu Li-an has this report.
The United States called North Korea's firing of around 100 artillery rounds into South Korean waters on Monday as dangerous and provocative, adding that Pyongyang's threats will only isolate the regime even further.
We remain steadfast in our commitment to the defense of our allies, and we remain in close coordination with both the Republic of Korea and Japan.
U.S. State Department Deputy Spokeswoman Marie Harf said she was concerned about North Korea's deliberate decision to further escalate tensions.
They can choose to further escalate, or they can choose to come in line with their international obligations and rejoin the international community. Unfortunately, what we've seen recently particularly is the former.
U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel urged North Korea to discontinue such provocations. He said he would discuss the issue with his Chinese counterpart during a trip to Beijing next week. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei expressed concern over the rising tensions on the Korean peninsula and called for restraint from both sides.
All sides should remain calm and not do anything to worsen tensions. The two should work to protect peace and stability on the Korean peninsula.
The two Koreas on Monday afternoon exchanged fires across the disputed Western Sea border known as the Northern Limit Line. Pyongyang has been raising its levels of threats in recent days after the United Nations condemned its mid-range missile launches last week and against a backdrop of joint military drills between South Korea and the United States. Yu Li-an, ARIRANG News.
Now, Washington's special envoy for North Korean human rights issues will be making visits to South Korea and Japan this week and next. The U.S. State Department said Monday that Robert King will leave for Tokyo on Tuesday for a 3-day trip during which he will meet with senior officials and discuss North Korea's abduction of Japanese nationals decades ago. King will then travel to Seoul from Sunday to Wednesday for a series of talks with senior South Korean officials that will center on North Korea's human rights abuses, as well as Korean-American Kenneth Bae, who has been held in North Korea for a year and a half.
For the latest news that impacts Korea and the world, join Yoo Ji-hye for a lively half-hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Move aimed at fostering startups as part of the government's 3-year economic innovation plan. Some encouraging signs that the Korean economy is picking up steam. The nation's exports rose to their second highest mark on record in March on growing global demand. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the figures.
The export-reliant Korean economy is gaining momentum toward a stronger recovery as advanced nations boosted consumption of Korean products last month. Korea's trade ministry said Tuesday that the nation's exports rose 5.2% in March from the same period a year earlier to over $49 billion. That is the second highest mark on record and faster growth compared to a 1.5% rise in February. Exports to the U.S. jumped 17% in March from the previous year, while those to the European Union rose 15%. Korea's exports to the U.S. in particular slowed in the first 2 months of the year due to harsh winter weather, with the rate of increase remaining in the single figures.
The world economy is on the recovery and the momentum is getting stronger. So the second half of this year, the exports of South Korea is expected to go faster.
Still, experts add that the slowing Chinese economy and the impact of the slowdown on global financial markets could cloud the positive outlook. By-product mobile communication devices, such as handsets, soared over 30%, with shipments of automobiles rising 16%. Korea's imports, meanwhile, reached $45 billion last month, up 3.6% from the previous year, helped by an increase in purchases of consumer goods. The trade surplus came to around $4.2 billion. Hwang Jie, ARIRANG News.
Retailers in Korea are feeling better about the pace of the nation's economic recovery. The business sentiment among them for the coming months has hit a near 3-year high. Korea's Chamber of Commerce and the Trade Ministry said the country's business survey index for the second quarter jumped to 113, up 9 points from 3 months ago to its highest level since the third quarter of 2011. A reading above the benchmark 100 means that optimists outnumber pessimists. The index has been on the rise for 4 consecutive quarters now. Improved conditions were projected across the board, especially in the semiconductor and machineries sectors. And over in the U.S., Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen said there is still room for the central bank to help the economy. She offered a passionate defense of the Fed's easy money policies, making clear the struggling U.S. job market will continue to need the help of low interest rates for some time to come. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
In her first public speech since becoming Fed chair 2 months ago, Janet Yellen cited the struggles of 3 American workers to back up the central bank's policies of low interest rates and continued bond buying. She said considerable slack still exists in the job market, a sign that further monetary stimulus can still be effective.
I think this extraordinary commitment is still needed and will be for some time. And I believe this view is widely shared by my fellow policymakers at the Fed.
The Fed has held interest rates near zero for more than 5 years now. The central bank says it will keep rates there for a considerable time, even after it ends its bond buying program, which is on course to be wound down later this year. Yellen said the U.S. economy remains well short of the Fed's goals of maximum sustainable employment.
I believe the Fed's policies will continue to help sustain progress in the job market. But the scars from the Great Recession remain, and reaching our goals will take time.
U.S. stocks rose on Monday, with the Standard & Poor's 500 ending March with moderate gains. Yellen's remarks calmed investors, many of whom had grown anxious the Fed might raise short-term rates by mid-2015. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
It's been exactly 10 years since Korea's first ever free trade agreement with Chile came into effect. So, how has the decade-old trade pact affected Korea's trade with the Latin American country? Well, ARIRANG News' Na Young-kyung has the answer.
The trade volume between Korea and Chile has jumped 4.5 times to more than $7 billion over the past 10 years. Exports grew from $500 million to $2.5 billion, while imports more than quadrupled to $4.7 billion, according to the Korea Customs Service. Given that Korea's overall trade volume increased about threefold in the same period, experts say the trade sector has without question benefited from the Korea-Chile FTA. Since 2004, Korea has entered into 9 free trade pacts with a total of 46 countries, and the nation's automobile industry remains the biggest beneficiary. But very real concerns linger over the impact on the nation's agricultural industry. In order to minimize the negative effects on the domestic agricultural sector, experts are calling for reforms in the market's retail structure.
For items that are dominant in the market, more open competition needs to be in place so that the consumers can reap the benefits. Korea's retail industry also tends to be monopolistic. Diverse retail channels will help products compete in a fairer manner.
Questions over whether the nation's small and mid-sized firms have seen any benefits also remain. A survey conducted by the Korea International Trade Association shows that although 60% of the nation's SMEs with sales of less than $9.3 million utilized the FTAs, nearly half felt that the trade deals had not helped them in any way. Trade officials have called for more detailed and customized information to be readily available to the SMEs so that they can strategize and pave themselves an easier path into the overseas market. 나현경, ARIRANG News.
Those of you in Korea may have woken up a bit earlier than expected this morning due to a rare magnitude 5.1 earthquake. It was the 3rd strongest ever recorded in the nation, but didn't cause any notable damage. Our Kwon So-ah has the details.
A 5.1 magnitude earthquake shook the nation at 4:48 a.m. Tuesday morning, with an epicenter in waters around 100 kilometers west of Taean County in Chungcheongnam-do Province. It's the 4th most powerful earthquake ever recorded on the Korean peninsula and the 3rd strongest in South Korea. Tuesday's quake lasted between 5 and 7 seconds and affected an area spanning a radius of 200 kilometers, shaking buildings and other structures. Even residents of Seoul and Gyeonggi-do Province were among those who felt the earth move beneath them.
I was awake. My house shook so much that our refrigerator made rattling noises.
Hundreds of citizens called their local authorities to report the quake, and social network services were full of messages on the rare incident. It's also raised concerns about whether Korea is prepared for the possibility of stronger quakes. While experts say a magnitude 5 quake with an epicenter on land would likely cause damage, they add that Korea's geological site conditions make the chances of a large magnitude earthquake like those seen in Japan and China very small. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Riding a motorcycle are widely considered dangerous, but this newly developed motorbike that our Sun Jung-in is about to report on could be a different story. It's a 2-wheel vehicle that can't be toppled even after being tugged by an SUV.
This fully enclosed 2-wheel vehicle is part motorcycle, part car, and virtually untippable, and it could soon be in your garage. Its most notable feature is it's able to balance itself and stay upright when fully stopped or even when being pulled by a rope tied to a moving truck. So in the event of a collision, the vehicle balances itself instead of falling over, giving the rider more protection. Daniel Kim, the Korean-American founder and CEO of Lit Motors, who came up with the design, says the secret lies in a special feature.
So if you're wondering how to keep balanced, we have a patented technology. We use gyroscopes to actually keep the vehicle upright. So it makes it untippable. So you need a baby elephant to knock it over.
Safety is a key, but with a maximum speed of 160 kilometers per hour, it's also pretty speedy. The 2-person vehicle is also electric and can go almost 320 kilometers on a 2-hour charge. Kim says the vehicle will be released within the year for a price of $24,000. Sun Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
Let's check on some of the stories making headlines on the global front. From France's new prime minister to a UN court putting the brakes on Japan's whaling program, we go live for Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, let's start in Paris, where President Francois Hollande has tapped his former interior minister as his new prime minister. What's behind the shakeup?
The move follows the resignation of the now former Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault and his entire government after suffering a brutal blow in Sunday's local elections. The ruling Socialist Party had lost more than 150 major towns, mostly to the opposition right, the Front National. Prime Minister-designate Valls, who is France's most popular socialist, is expected to present a linear government team later this week. In a televised address on Monday, Hollande said the cabinet reshuffle would mark a new chapter for his government.
It is time today to start a new phase, so I've given Manuel Valls the task of steering the French government. He has the qualities needed. It will be a tight team, coherent and united. How can I put it? A government that will fight.
Hollande also promised tax cuts to boost consumer spending. The government's resignation is a huge blow to the president, whose first 2 years in power have seen him become the most unpopular head of state in recent history.
And let's now turn to a surprise move by Russia. It appears Moscow has taken a step back. Paul, what are the details of this partial military withdrawal?
An infantry battalion of Russian troops pulled back from the tense border between Russia and eastern Ukraine Monday. President Vladimir Putin announced a partial withdrawal in a telephone call with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. However, it's estimated that 40,000 Russian soldiers will remain stationed along the border area. Moscow's deputy defense minister said Russian military hardware would be deployed to bases across Crimea, which have been vacated by Ukrainian troops.
Today, the first trains have left. Tomorrow, they will be followed by the others. Today, we will put together the schedule and finish the whole operation within a month.
Earlier Monday, Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev visited Crimea with a delegation of government ministers. Kiev condemned the visit as a crude violation of international rules. Meanwhile, NATO foreign ministers are to meet in Brussels beginning Tuesday to discuss steps that can be taken to support Ukraine.
And Paul, moving on to the latest development in the search for the missing Malaysian airliner, it looks like the Malaysian government has backtracked on its official account of the last words from the missing airliner. What changed?
In a statement on Monday, Malaysian officials revised the last words heard from the plane to "Good night, Malaysian 370, not all right, good night," as previously reported. The Transport Ministry said forensic evidence will determine who spoke those final words. Meanwhile, Air Chief Marshal Angus Houston, who is leading the coordinated search from Australia, says finding any traces of the plane's wreckage could take weeks.
Based on the best information available to us. It's a vast search area, and I think that's what is important to emphasise to you this morning. You know, essentially, we do not have any precision in where the aircraft entered the water, and that's why, if we can find a piece of wreckage, some debris, we will then be able to narrow the search to a much smaller area.
Flight 370 is believed to have disappeared over the Indian Ocean while en route to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur on March 8th.
All right, Paul. And lastly, let's talk about the recent ruling by the United Nations calling for the immediate end to Japan's whaling program. Tell us more.
The top UN judges ordered Monday that Japan must halt its whaling operations in the Southern Ocean around Antarctica after rejecting Tokyo's claim that it constitutes as scientific research. The legally binding decision came in a 12-4 judgment. The presiding judge, Peter Tomka, said the so-called research program was responsible for killing thousands of minke whales.
The court concludes that the special permits granted by Japan for the killing, taking and treating of whales in connection with JARPA 2 are not for purposes of scientific research.
The court issued an immediate cancellation of all whaling permits under the program, a decision Japan said it would accept with disappointment. The case was brought to the International Court of Justice in 2010 by Australia that said the program was commercial whaling in disguise. Jie?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for that update. We'll see you back in about 2 hours' time. Time to get a check on weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Now, Bo-kyung, it was a beautiful day here in Seoul. How's tomorrow looking?
Well, Tia, tomorrow looks to be similar to today, so make sure to enjoy the wonderful weather while you can. Moving on to our current conditions, the nation is under the influence of a high-pressure system from the West Sea, which is why we're seeing clear skies across the map. But clouds will begin to move in tomorrow evening, leading to nationwide showers on Thursday. Once the rain clears up, temperatures will drop to the seasonal average range as cold air moves in. Other than that, this weekend looks to be nice and sunny. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju make it to the mid-20s, while Busan peaks at 20 degrees. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon tops out at 22 degrees, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang reach the mid-teens. That's all the updates for this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Yoo Ji-hye in Seoul. I'll be back with more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time. See you then.